My name is Marianne Kessler. I'm 57 years old, and I've been an IQ nurse for 32 years. On Easter Sunday, at my mother's kitchen table, with the yellow roses I'd carried 5 hours still lying in their paper by the sink, my mother looked me in the eye in front of everybody and said, "There are days I wish I'd never had a daughter." I stood up, I folded my napkin into a square and set it beside my plate the way I'd set down every clean thing in my life, and I said, "Then stop having one." I walked out to my car and I drove. 11 minutes later, my phone lit up in the cup holder. All capital letters, "Bring my car back or I'm calling the police." I read it twice, and for the first time that whole day, I smiled. Then I typed back 2 words, "Go ahead." 40 minutes after that, 2 sheriff's cruisers were parked in front of my mother's house with their light bars turning across the porch where my family stood, and a deputy holding a plate reader was about to ask my mother one simple question that she had spent 13 years praying nobody would ever ask her out loud. Here's what none of them understood yet. Those cruisers were not the end of anything. They were the first page. What my mother set in motion with one phone call was going to cost this family a great deal more than a car. And by the end of that summer, not one of us was living the same life. Stay with me. Because the part that broke me wasn't the police. It was a cigar box in a hall closet, and what I found inside it 3 weeks later. Let me tell you what I do, because it matters to everything that comes after. I'm a charge nurse in a cardiac intensive care unit in Knoxville, Tennessee. 32 years. Nights, mostly for the first 20. What I do is keep track. I keep track of 11 patients, 4 ventilators, a family in the waiting room who hasn't eaten since Tuesday, and a resident who is one bad decision away from a very long night. I write it all down. Times, doses, who said what, who signed what. In my line of work, there's an old saying, if you didn't chart it, it didn't happen. I was good at it. They made me charge nurse at 34, and the people who worked under me knew 2 things about me. Kessler keeps her word, and Kessler doesn't walk into a room without knowing what she's going to do in it. Then there was my other life, the one that lived 5 hours north on I-75 in Louisville, Kentucky, where not one single thing I just told you counted for anything. Up there, I wasn't a charge nurse. I wasn't really even a daughter. I was a line on a budget. I was the reliable one. The one you called when the water heater went, when the court date came, when the card got declined at the pharmacy counter, and everybody stood there pretending to look at the magazine rack. It took me the better part of 2 decades to see the shape of it, and I want to be honest with you about why it took so long. I liked being needed. In my work, being the person everybody leans on is the entire job. That's not a flaw in an IQ. That's the whole trade. I carried that home with me like something on my scrubs, and I called it love. But every line has a breaking point. It just needs enough weight for long enough. Mine had a date on it. I just didn't know it yet. Easter Sunday. A table set for 7, a ham going cold, and my mother's face doing something I had never in my life seen it do. It started, the way these things usually start, with a funeral. My father died in 2007. I was 38, already 15 years into nursing, and I got the call at the end of a 12-hour shift with somebody else's blood on my shoe covers. He was a good man. He ran a small heating and cooling business, and he never charged widows the full amount. And he left behind a wife who had never once written a check, a mortgage 2 months behind, and a coffee can in the garage with about $400 in it. My brother Russell was 34 then and living 20 minutes from Mom. When the bills came due, he said the sentence he would go on saying, in one form or another, for the next 19 years. I'm in between things right now, but as soon as I get settled. Nothing ever got settled. So I did what I do. I made a plan. I set up an automatic transfer out of every paycheck, straight from my account into my mother's, before I ever laid eyes on the money. I ate a lot of oatmeal that first year. I told myself it was temporary. Here is the detail I want you to sit with, because I sat with it for 19 years. In all that time, my mother never asked me once what I was living on, never asked what I gave up, whether there was a man in my life, whether my knees hurt, whether I was sleeping. The phone only ever ran one direction. How much can you send this month? Marianne, the water heater. Marianne, your brother's in a spot. Marianne. I told myself I was holding my family together, and I believed it the way you believe anything you say to yourself in the dark at 2 a.m. The truth was simpler and colder, and it took me 19 years to say it plain. I wasn't holding my family together. I was teaching them what I was for. In 2013, my mother's landlord sold the duplex out from under her. She called me at midnight crying, saying she'd end up in some apartment building that smelled like other people's suppers. I was 44. I'd been picking up extra shifts since my father died the way only a person with no life will do, and I had a real number sitting in savings. So that spring, I bought a house, 3 bedrooms, brick, on a quiet street in the south end of Louisville. $980 a month, plus taxes and insurance, paid out of Tennessee by a woman who would sleep in that house maybe 5 nights a year. The deed said Mary Ann Kessler. The keys went to my mother. I stood in that empty kitchen on move-in day, still a little sick from watching my savings drain, and my mother turned around in a slow circle with her hand over her mouth, and she said, "Finally, a house of my own. Not thank you, not I'll pay you back. A house of my own." I opened my mouth, and then I closed it. That silence is the most expensive thing I have ever purchased in my life, because a story got planted in that kitchen, and stories grow faster than roses. Inside of a year, the neighbors called it Vivian's house. The ladies at her church prayed a blessing over Vivian's home. Russell told people at the shop that our mother owned her house free and clear. 3 people alive knew whose name was on that deed at the county clerk's office. 2 of them worked very hard to forget it. And come April, the whole street was going to find out in one single evening. People ask me how a grown woman with a good head on her shoulders lets herself get bled for 19 years. And the answer is, one reasonable request at a time. Nobody ever asks you for 19 years of your life. They ask you for a roof. The roof was $11,900 after a hailstorm, and Mom couldn't very well live under a tarp. They ask you for teeth. $6,200 for my mother's dentures and the work underneath them, because a woman shouldn't be ashamed to smile in her own church pew. Bail for Russell $3,500 one time only, which is what everybody says the first time. $200 a month for Russell's gas and phone, which by year 4, nobody even pretended was a loan. And every single time I paid, my mother said the same sentence. Warm as a stove and final as a receipt. That's what family's for. She said it the way other people say amen. There was exactly one person in that family who ever treated me like something other than an account number, and she wasn't even born until I'd been nursing 8 years. My niece Shelby, Russell's girl, the only person in that entire bloodline who ever sent me a thank you note. When I paid for her first 2 semesters of nursing school, she wrote me 3 pages by hand about a clinical rotation and an old man on her floor who called her the good one. I kept that letter in my nightstand the way other women keep love letters. Here's the part I never told anybody. In 13 years, I never spent a single Christmas night in the house I was buying. There was never a bedroom in it for me. I slept on the couch under a picture of a farmhouse nobody in our family ever owned, and I drove back to Tennessee before the leftovers ran out. I paid for every room in that house. I never got one. In 2022, I finally bought something for myself. A used SUV, gray, low miles, paid off in 14 months because debt with my name on it is a thing I don't carry lightly. You'll understand why here in a minute. Then in January of 2025, I took a travel contract. 9 months in Anchorage, Alaska. Cardiac EQ, double the pay, and honestly, a little bit of running away. Before I left, I made what I thought was a sensible decision. I left the SUV in my mother's garage instead of paying to store it. I asked them to start it once a week and keep the battery up. When I flew home in September, my car had 11,000 new miles on it, a hitch on the back I never put there, cigarette burns in the passenger seat, and a brand new name. Mom's car. She said it right over the fence to the neighbor, easy as talking about weather. Mary Ann's in town. She's borrowing my car. I want to be clear about what I did next because I was not naive, and I need you to know that. I didn't yell. I did paperwork. The title was in my fireproof box in Knoxville, where it had always been. Registration, my name. Insurance, my name, my address. I had a second key made, and when my week was up, I drove my own vehicle home to Tennessee. You'd have thought I stole from the collection plate. Russell called me small. My mother didn't speak to me for 9 days, which, if I'm honest, were peaceful days. In nursing, we'd call what I did correcting the record. On my mother's street, they called it what Mary Ann did to her poor mama. Fine. A car is an annoyance, and annoyances I can live with. What I found 4 months later, on the last Tuesday in January, was something else entirely. I was pre-approved for a little place on Norris Lake. Nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, a dock that needed work, the first thing I would ever own that was actually for me, so I was watching my credit like a hawk watches a fence line. And a letter came to my address in Knoxville. Collections. A store credit card I had never opened. 8 months old. $14,600, charged off, statements mailed, and I had to read this line 3 times to the house in Louisville, Kentucky. I did not panic. I did what I do. I called on my lunch break, froze everything, filed the dispute, and asked for the full charge history. The fraud department was very kind and completely useless, the way fraud departments always are. They told me that to clear a debt that size when you can name a suspect, they'd want a police report and a signed affidavit. Then the charge history came through, and I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage and read it line by line, the way you read a chart on a patient who isn't going to make it. An electronics store on Dixie Highway, an auto parts chain over and over and over, a steakhouse, 2 motel charges in Indiana, a 4-wheeler, and the very first purchase, the very first day, 8 months back while I was 4,000 miles away in Anchorage, was a set of trailer tires. I sat there a long while with my thumb on that line, because I knew exactly whose trailer those tires were riding on. That Saturday I drove up to Louisville with a folder. I bring folders to gunfights. I sat my brother down at the kitchen table in the house I owned, and I laid the charge history in front of him, and I watched Russell go through his whole catalog: confusion, outrage, wounded dignity, and then, where he always lands, entitlement. I was going to have it paid off before you ever noticed, he said. It's family money anyway. You weren't even in the country. Alaska is in the country, Russell. My mother did not ask him one single question. She turned to me, and then she got down. 79 years old, both hands on my sleeve, lowering herself onto that linoleum I paid to have laid. You'd put your own brother in a prison cell? Your own flesh and blood? I'm begging you, Marianne. Here's what I did, and you can judge me for either half of it. I did not call the police that day, but I also did not take another promise. I wrote out an agreement in plain English on a legal pad. Russell acknowledged the account. Russell owed $14,600. Russell had 30 days to make a first payment and set a schedule, and if he did, I would tell the bank I could not identify who was responsible. He signed it with my pen, smirking, the way a boy signs a detention slip. My mother stood behind his chair with her hand on his shoulder like they were sitting for a portrait. 30 days ran out on Monday, March the 30th. Monday came and went. No payment, no call, not one word out of Kentucky. And on Easter Sunday, I got up before daylight and drove 5 hours north anyway. Write that down as my last installment of hope. I was on the road at 4 in the morning, because if you leave Knoxville at 4, you're in Louisville by 10 with time to stop for flowers. I bought yellow roses. My mother grew climbing yellow roses on the fence at the old house when I was a girl, back when my daddy was alive and the money questions were small ones. Every year I bring them. Every year I watch her set them somewhere out of the way. In the back seat, I had a photo album I'd spent 2 evenings putting together. 40 years of us. The last page was a picture of Mom on the porch swing I'd paid to have rehung. When I pulled up, Russell was already on the porch with a beer at 10:30 in the morning, and he looked at my sub the way a man looks at an ex-wife. My Aunt Dolores' sedan was in the driveway. Through the window I could see her at the stove, stirring something, keeping her eyes down. Shelby met me on the walk and hugged me hard enough to hurt and whispered, "I'm glad you came, Aunt Mare." Inside, my mother was holding court. She opened Russell's gift first, a picture frame with the drugstore sticker still on the back, and she pressed it to her chest like it was a Bible from 1890. My roses went on the counter by the sink, still in their paper. Fine. I didn't drive 5 hours over flower arrangement. I drove up with one sentence in my pocket, rehearsed, sanded smooth, and meant for after the pie. A quiet question from my brother, no scene, no audience, just an honest answer that was 36 days late. That was the whole plan. Ask him gently, over coffee. I never got to dessert. We made it through the ham and the deviled eggs on the strength of my aunt talking about the weather. Then the forks slowed down, and I looked across at my brother, and I asked it low and level, the way you'd ask a new nurse about a missing narcotic count. Your 30 days ran out a week ago, Russ. Where are we? That's all. No raised voice, no folder, nothing dramatic. Russell's fork stopped in midair. Shelby went still beside me, and my mother came up out of her chair like I'd flipped the table. "You will not do this," she said. "Not in my house. Not on Easter Sunday." I said, "Mama, it's a question. It isn't an accusation." And that was gasoline. She called me ungrateful. She said I'd been keeping score my whole life, keeping a ledger like a bank, like a bill collector, and she reached for the worst word she had, like a stranger. She said Russell had troubles I was too hard to understand, because 30 years around dying people had made me cold. She said a real daughter lifts her family up. She doesn't drag them out into the light and count their sins. I sat there with my hands flat on either side of my plate, and I watched my mother's face go somewhere I had never once seen it go in 57 years, some last door swinging open. She looked me dead in the eye across the roses somebody had finally moved to the table, and she said it. There are days I wish I'd never had a daughter. Clock over the stove ticked twice. Dolores stared into the deviled eggs. Russell studied the ceiling fan with his thumb tapping the neck of his beer. A man watching a storm that was never going to rain on him. I stood up. I folded my napkin into a square and set it beside my plate, corners true, the way I've set down every clean thing in my life. Then stop having one, I said. And I picked up my keys, and I walked out of my mother's favorite Sunday of the year. I made it 11 minutes down Preston Highway before the phone lit up in the cup holder. I pulled into the lot of a pancake house to read it because I don't text and drive, and I sure wasn't going to die for that family in traffic. All capitals. My mother's thumbs. Bring my car back or I'm calling the police. I sat in the driver's seat of a vehicle I had bought with 14 months of overtime, and I reached over and opened the glove box, where the registration and the insurance card sat in a plastic sleeve, both of them reading Marianne L. Kessler, with an address in Knox County, Tennessee. Something in my chest went very quiet and very level. It's the same thing that happens to me when a monitor alarms and everybody else in the room starts moving fast. I typed back 2 words. Go ahead. Then I called my insurance company's after-hours line and confirmed the policyholder of record, just to have a timestamp on it. I ordered a coffee I didn't drink. 19 minutes later, my phone rang. Shelby. Whisper shouting from the hallway. Aunt Mare, she really did it. She called and told them you stole her car. Daddy's out on the porch hollering at the whole street, and he's been drinking since breakfast. Can you please come back? I looked at the registration sleeve on the passenger seat, right where my roses should have been. I'm coming, I said, but hear me, baby. I'm not coming back to apologize. The registered owner ought to be standing there when her property gets reported stolen. Call it professional courtesy. If you have ever been the person your family treats like a bank with a pulse, you already know exactly how that drive back felt. Because what those deputies found on my mother's porch is the part this family still will not say out loud. The first cruiser was already at the curb when I turned back onto her street. Light bar sweeping the porch, where my mother stood with her arms crossed like a woman waiting on a valet. Up and down the block, curtains hung at that careful half-open angle. I parked across the street, legal and calm, and rolled my window down in time to hear the deputy, Whitlow, by the name on his shirt, reading a plate off his shoulder mic. He'd run my tag before he ever set foot on her porch. That's the thing nobody tells you about reporting a car stolen. The very first thing the law does is ask the computer who owns it. Ma'am, Whitlow said, patient as gravel, this vehicle comes back registered to a Marianne Kessler out of Tennessee. Is that you? That's my daughter, my mother said. It's the family car. She took it. Is your name on the title, ma'am? And my mother, I will remember this until the day they put me in the ground, waved her hand at the whole street, at the house, at the sub idling across the road. Everything here is family, she said. We don't go dividing things up with paper. Deputy, I could have written that sentence for you before you got here. That sentence is the family constitution. That's when Russell came banging out through the storm door with a fresh beer and 19 years of grievance, pointing his finger, announcing to the deputy in the street and God Almighty that this was harassment, and that his sister has always thought she was better than everybody. Whitlow keyed his mic and asked for a second unit in that flat voice that means paperwork has officially begun. I crossed the street and handed him my driver's license, my registration, my insurance card, and my phone, open to a photograph of the title that lives in a fireproof box in my closet. He looked at each one, looked at my mother, looked back at me. Ma'am, he said, would you mind stepping over by my vehicle a minute? This won't take long. The second unit ran everybody's names off that porch, because that's what they do once a scene gets loud. And that is how Easter Sunday ended with my brother in handcuffs, though calling it my doing gives me far too much credit. It turned out Russell had picked up a Dewey back in November, and then failed to show for court in February, bench warrant, active, sitting in that computer like a landmine with his name on it, and not one soul in my family had breathed a word of it to me. 48 years old, protesting his way down his mother's porch steps in an untucked shirt while a deputy read numbers off a card at him. And here's the moment I want you to hold on to. My mother did not scream at the deputies. She screamed at me. Do something, both hands out, her voice cracking. You know people at that hospital, you know lawyers. Do something, Marianne. Even then, even with her son in cuffs on her own front lawn from her own phone call, I was not her daughter. I was her asset, and she was demanding a withdrawal. Deputy Whitlow wrote my mother a formal warning for false reporting and explained to her twice, slowly, that the vehicle was mine, had always been mine, and that the next made-up call would not end with a warning. Then he walked me back to my car and lowered his voice. Ma'am, anything else we ought to know tonight? I looked at the porch, at my mother, gone small and gray under the yellow bug light, at Shelby's face behind the storm door glass. The $14,600 answer was sitting right there behind my teeth. Not tonight, I said. I checked into a motel out by the interstate with my mother's voice still going in my ears, and some quiet clerk inside me already reaching for a pen. Here's what a nurse does when the world tilts. She takes inventory. I sat cross-legged on a bedspread the color of old mustard with my laptop open and my banking history glowing, and I started pulling statements, not out of spite, because I had been working this family blind for 19 years, and blind had just gotten me a plate of ham and one sentence I'll never unhear. Auto draft mortgage 2013 to present. Auto draft utilities. The phone plan with 4 lines, one of which was mine. Transfers with memo lines that said roof and teeth and court thing, and dozens with no memo at all. Around midnight, Shelby texted. Grandma's calling everybody saying, you sent the police to arrest Daddy. Aunt Dolores is over here. Nobody is asking what actually happened. I was there, Aunt Mare. I'll tell anybody who asks. I looked at that a long time. 22 years old, and the only witness in that house who thought the truth was worth typing. I wrote back, you don't have to pick a side, baby. That's not your job. 3 dots, then. You never had one single person on yours. Now you do. I put the phone face down, because a woman my age does not cry in a motel over a text message. And I went back to the statements, month after month after month, all of it running one direction, like blood out of a wound. Nobody will close because everybody's too polite to mention the knife. Sometime past 2 a.m, I stopped scrolling and reached for the little notepad by the phone. I had a number by daylight. At 7 I drove to a drugstore and bought a pack of index cards because some numbers deserve better than motel stationery. Back in the room, I spread it all out across that bedspread and added it twice. The mortgage since 2013, the taxes and the insurance, the $11,900 roof, the dentures, the bail, the gas money, the water heater, the 100 quiet transfers with no memo at all. Then I took a pencil and wrote one number on one card, and I'm going to tell you what it was, because this story doesn't work without it. $246,000. Give or take the kindness I forgot to write down. And the $14,600 wasn't even in that total. That belonged in a different column. The column of things taken instead of given. The fact that my family needed both columns is its own kind of diagnosis. I sat on the floor with my back against the bed and held that card and waited to feel something clean. Righteousness, maybe, or at least arithmetic. Instead, a question came up out of that number and sat down across from me, and it was not a question about them. What exactly had I been buying? Because $246,000 is not what a roof costs, or a tooth, or a water heater. That's what a seat at the table costs, when you've been convinced you weren't born with one. I didn't have an answer that morning. I slid the card into my wallet behind my driver's license, where I keep the things I might have to answer for someday. Then I looked at the clock. It was Monday. The bank had asked me for one signature back in February. That morning, they were going to get it. A police department smells like burnt coffee and copier toner, and I mean that as a compliment. It smells like things getting written down. I sat across from a detective named Ruiz, compact fellow, reading glasses pushed up on his head, and I filed the report I had been sitting on for 9 weeks, identity theft, fraudulent account, $14,600, and on the affidavit, on the line that says, suspect if known, I did not write unknown. I printed my brother's full legal name in block capitals. Block capitals keep your hand from shaking. I handed Ruiz the charge history, my Alaska contract, and my badge swipe record showing 9 months 4,000 miles away, while that card was born and fed, and the agreement Russell signed at my kitchen table. My kitchen table, admitting the whole debt in his own smug ballpoint. Ruiz read that last one twice and looked up over his glasses. He signed this. He did. Ma'am, he said, in this office we call that a gift. I was in the parking lot when my Aunt Dolores called, and she skipped hello. Vivian told me what you did. Police reports, Marianne. Family does not call the law on family. I watched a robin hop across my hood. That hood. Dolores, I said. Mama called the law on me first, over a car I own. You were at that table. Ask Shelby about the rest. The silence on the other end did some math. If you go through with this, you are going to lose every single person in this family. All of us. And for the second time in 2 days, it came out of me level and unhurried, like it had been standing at attention my whole life waiting on the order. Go ahead. That afternoon, from a corner table in a motel lobby, I shut down a supply line that was 19 years old, and I did it the way I do everything, item by item, with a list. The utilities in my name at the Louisville house. Switched to notice, to occupants, 30 days to establish their own account. The 4-line phone plan I carried since 2016. I kept one line, mine. The credit card with my name on the account and my mother's name on a second card for what she called little things, which most recently included a patio set, closed, paid, done, Russell's $200 a month, a transfer so old it practically had a pension, canceled with 2 taps. And I'd love to tell you those 2 taps felt like something. Thunder, maybe. Truthfully, they felt like clipping a fingernail. 19 years, gone in an afternoon, and the phone didn't even get warm. The one thing I did not touch was the mortgage. Everybody expects that to be the first thing you cut, and it would have been the dumbest thing I could do. My deed, my credit, my name. You don't burn down your own bridge just because of who's standing on it. I kept paying that house note exactly as before. What ended was everything that made living in it free. By Wednesday, Shelby reported that Russell was out on bond and telling anybody with ears that his sister had gone nuclear over a misunderstanding. My mother had started a telephone campaign through the extended family and the church directory, and in her version, I was a cold, hard woman punishing a widow for loving her son. I answered none of it. I had one more envelope to send, and it was going certified. Tuesday morning, I signed 2 copies of a 30-day notice to vacate. One to my mother, one to my brother. Occupants of a single-family residence in Louisville, Kentucky. Owner of record, Mary Ann L. Kessler. My attorney was a Louisville real estate lawyer named Gail Forrester, who had a handshake like a door closing. They're tenants at will, she said. No lease, no rent history. 30 days in writing is the clean way. If they refuse, we file, it goes in front of a judge, and that's several more weeks. Kentucky doesn't put anybody on a curb overnight, and neither will you. Good, I said. I've waited 19 years. I can do the next 60 days by the book. She looked at me a second. Most people in that chair want it done angry. Angry's expensive, I said. I've already paid retail. The green certified cards came back with 2 signatures I've known my entire life. And then the phone really started. Cousins I hadn't heard from since my father's funeral. A deacon from Mom's church, gentle and fishing. An unknown number that turned out to be one of Russell's drinking buddies offering to mediate the whole thing over wings. In my mother's telling. And it traveled that family the way fire travels a dry field. I had abandoned a helpless widow, weaponized the police, and stolen her home right out from under her. Notice how that sentence is built, her home. 13 years of my direct deposits, and the story had swallowed the deed whole. I did not correct one single person, and I want you to understand why. You cannot win a story war against the woman who taught you how to talk. I had documents, she had the narrative, and only one of those 2 things holds up in a courtroom, which was the only room I planned on visiting. That Sunday, Aunt Dolores called the whole family to her dining room, including me. But before that, midweek, Detective Ruiz called, and his voice had the flat carefulness of a man delivering somebody else's nonsense. Your brother came in with a public defender. His statement is that you authorized the account, that the family, quote, shares money all the time, and this is a bookkeeping dispute you're weaponizing over a fight at a holiday dinner. I stood in that parking lot and laughed exactly once, with no joy anywhere in it. Of course. The family constitution, recited to a detective, we don't go dividing things up with paper. Detective, I said, that account opened in May of last year. From January through September, I was in Anchorage. You have my contract, my flight records, and 11 months of badge swipes on a unit 4,000 miles away. First charge was trailer tires on a Tuesday afternoon when I was standing at a nurse's station on Providence Drive. There are motel charges in Indiana on dates I can match to shifts. And he signed a written admission of the debt in February, which you're holding, before he'd ever heard the word detective. Ruiz was quiet a second, and I could hear him smile. I do love a complainant who brings her own file, he said. For what it's worth, his story came apart inside of 10 minutes. The Commonwealth Attorney's office isn't in a hurry, but this is moving. Then he added the sentence that told me how it was going to end. His attorney asked about restitution. In my experience, that means a plea is coming. 9 people sat around my aunt's dining table that Sunday, and not one of them was my mother, which told me the real purpose of the meeting before anybody opened their mouth. This was the negotiating team. Vivian was the government in exile. Dolores had made a coffee cake. There were legal pads. My cousin Dale cleared his throat and laid out what the family had worked out privately, and I'm going to give it to you exactly because you'll think I'm exaggerating. 1. I withdraw my statement to the police for the sake of family unity. 2. The notice gets torn up and Mom and Russell stay in the house with me covering it, like always. 3. Russell pays me back as he's able, when he's working. 4. And Dale had the decency to look down at his coffee cake for this one. In return, Mom would forgive me for Easter and welcome me back. I would be forgiven. Around that table, heads nodded at how fair it was. Dolores reached over and squeezed my wrist. "You've always been the strong one, honey. You keep things running. That's what family's for." There it was. The family motto, offered with love by the last blood ally I had at the exact moment she stopped being one. I reached into my jacket for my wallet, and I watched that entire table relax. 9 bodies loosening an inch, because the wallet coming out was the oldest happy ending this family knew. My thumb rested on the index card behind my license. 246,000 in pencil. I left it where it was. I closed the wallet, and I stood up. "No," I said. "Just that. Thank you for the coffee cake, Dolores." 9 people watched me walk out, and my phone was already buzzing in my pocket. 3 missed calls from Shelby. She'd been at the house helping her grandmother start packing, because whatever else was true, boxes had begun, and in the hall closet, up under the Christmas wrap, she'd found a cigar box. She video called me from the driveway with it open on the hood of her car. Money order receipts, hundreds of them, rubber banded by decade, $40 each every single month made out to my grandmother, my mother's mother, going back more than 30 years. The most recent ones were from years when I know for a fact my mother was deciding which utility to let slide. That evening on the back porch, Aunt Dolores, quiet ever since the summit, told me what nobody had ever told me. My grandmother took my mother's entire paycheck, uncashed, until Vivian was 28 years old and married and gone, called it board money, called it what a daughter owes. $40 a month till the day your grandmother died, Dolores said. Your mama never missed one. Honey, she learned love the only way it was ever taught to her. I drove back to that motel with my chest full of wet sand. I sat on the bed and I typed a long message to my mother. "I can fix this. I'll call Ruiz in the morning, tear up the notice, all of it. We can just be a family." And my thumb hovered. I want to be honest with you. It hovered a long, long time. Because that woman on the kitchen floor had once been a girl handing over an envelope with her whole month inside it. Then the phone buzzed in my hand. "Shelby, heads up. Grandma just told the church ladies you'll fold by the 4th of July. She said, quote, Marianne always folds. She's telling everybody. She isn't even worried." I read it twice. Then I deleted my message 1 letter at a time, and I turned off the lamp. Pity is real, so is the pattern. My mother was 1 link in a chain, and I was done being the next one. The counterattack showed up on a Thursday in a very serious envelope. Heavy paper, embossed heading, the words law offices in a typeface chosen to raise your blood pressure. It informed me that my mother had claims of constructive ownership of the Louisville property, plus elder displacement, plus reimbursement for improvements to the home in the amount of $45,000, and it invited me to withdraw my notice to avoid protracted litigation. I drove it straight to Gail Forrester, who read it in 90 seconds, set it down, and squared it with 1 finger. "This isn't law," she said. "This is hope with letterhead." The office, she'd already checked, belonged to a paralegal. My cousin Dale's husband, as it turned out, moonlighting in fonts above his pay grade. There was no lease. There was no contract. There was a deed with 1 name on it. 13 years of property tax receipts paid out of Tennessee, and a county's worth of records all pointing the same direction. "But," Gail said and held up a finger, "if your mother digs in past the 30 days, we still do this the long way. Filing, hearing date, a judge, maybe 8 more weeks. The paper is on your side. The calendar is not." "Buy the book," I told her. "Every page." That weekend, back in the motel for the 8th time, I took the index card out of my wallet and taped it to the bathroom mirror, and I'll tell you why. That letter had spooked something soft in me. The girl who pays money to make problems go quiet. The card was the antidote. $246,000 of quiet, and the problems had only ever gotten louder. Monday morning Gail called before I finished my first cup of coffee. "Well," she said, "the county posted the criminal docket online, and somebody in your family finally learned how to read one. Here's the thing about the truth in the age of county websites. You don't have to say a word. Commonwealth versus Russell Kessler appeared on the public docket. Identity theft plus the reopened DUI. And inside of a day, some cousin with insomnia found the property valuation administrator search where that house sat under my name. Purchase date 2013. Tax bills mailed to Tennessee. 13 years. Every one of them paid. Screenshots move faster than sermons. Family group chat, which had gone silent toward me after the summit, reportedly detonated. I say reportedly because I was never in it. You learn a great deal about where you stand in a family by which threads you are never added to. Shelby forwarded me the highlights. Half of them flicked overnight. Why did nobody tell us Marianne owns it, and the other half hardened like concrete, because for some people, paper that contradicts the story just proves the paper is rude. 2 cousins called wanting to hear my side. I let both go to voicemail and answered each with 1 line. The county clerk tells it fine. I'd only be adding feelings. My mother's response to the documentary age was magnificent in its way. She told the church ladies the deed was a tax arrangement. 79 years old, inventing federal policy on the church steps. Meanwhile, the house began, quietly, to obey the calendar. Shelby reported real boxes now, labeled in her grandmother's upright Sunday school cursive. Russell, out on bond and suddenly aware that judges read dockets too, borrowed a truck and a trailer from one of the wing mediation buddies. 11 days left on the notice. And then, on a Tuesday evening, my phone lit up with a name I had relabeled at 2 a.m. in a motel room. Vivian. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail, and I sat looking at that little red dot a long while before I pressed play. The message was 11 seconds long, and it broke more of me than Easter had. Her voice was low, unarmored, a register I had not heard since before my father died. Annie, it's your mother. Come to supper Sunday, just the 2 of us. I'll make the pot roast. A pause. Please. Annie. Nobody had called me Annie since Daddy. My mother always used Mary Ann, and she swung it like a gavel. I played it 4 times. Then I called Renata Fields, who charged nights beside me for 11 years and retired down to Maryville, the closest thing I've got to a sister. Renata listened to that voicemail twice down the phone line and then asked the only question that mattered. The one I'd been dodging in that bathroom mirror for weeks. All right, before you go, what do you want to be true when you walk back out of that house? I opened my mouth and nothing came, because the honest answer was a child's answer. I want the pot roast to mean she loves me. I want the last 19 years to have been a misunderstanding. I want my mom. I wasn't ready to say that out loud to anybody, including myself. I'll report back, I said. And Renata, who has heard me joke my way through 2 codes in one night, let it go with a sigh that said we both knew. Sunday afternoon, I ironed a blouse to a standard no blouse has ever needed. I checked my wallet, license, index card, both accounted for, one for who I am, one for what it cost. Then I drove to the house where my mother was cooking my childhood in a kitchen I paid for, and I walked up the steps understanding one thing very clearly. Whatever got served that night, it was the most expensive supper of my life. The table was set for 2 on the embroidered runner that only came out for holidays. The whole house smelled like 1978, pot roast, with the carrots gone soft and sweet the way I asked for on every birthday until I stopped having birthdays there. The boxes were stacked along the hallway wall, taped and labeled, and we both pretended not to see them. My mother had fixed her hair. She served me first. And then Vivian Kessler, 79 years old, folded her hands on that table, looked at me steadily, and did the thing I had quietly wanted for 4 decades. I said a wicked thing to you on Easter, she said. A wicked, wicked thing, and I have heard it every night since in that bedroom. I did not move. You lost your daddy, and you turned into the man of this family at 38 years old, and I let you, and then I punished you for it. Her chin went, just once. I have been hard on you your whole life, Annie, and I want you to know I was proud of you every single day of it, every promotion. I cut your name out of the hospital newsletter twice. I just never learned how to say it to your face because nobody ever once said it to mine. I sat there with my fork down and my eyes burning. 57 years old, 32 years in nursing, coming apart over carrots. There it was. The words. The exact words. Cut to fit the exact hole they'd been missing from my whole life. And then my mother reached down beside her chair, picked up a manila envelope, and slid it across that runner until it touched my plate. The way a waiter slides the check toward you at the end of a nice meal. Inside was a photocopy of my police statement. Russell must have gotten it from his attorney. Detective Ruse's phone number was written across the front in her upright Sunday school cursive. Call that detective Monday morning, she said gently, evenly, like a woman describing something already agreed to. Tell him it was a family misunderstanding. Tear up that awful letter about the house, and I will be your mother again, Annie. We can have all of it back. All of it back. There was the price tag sitting exactly where the love should have been. I would love to tell you I came back with something sharp. I didn't. I sat looking at that envelope touching my plate, and I reached into my jacket and took out my wallet, and from behind my license I drew the index card. $246,000 in pencil, in my own block capitals. My plan, if you can call it that, had always been to lay it on the table at a moment exactly like this one. Make her look at the number. Make her count what I counted at 2 a.m. on a motel bedspread. My thumb was actually on it when I understood, all at once, and very quietly, why I never would. If I put that number on the table, we were just doing the thing this family has always done. Pricing love, haggling over it. She had named her price for being my mother. Mine was supposed to be $246,000. The only way out of the store is to stop shopping. I slid the card back behind my license, I folded my hands, and I told my mother no, in the same low-level voice I'd used on that porch with the deputies because it's the only voice I have left that I trust. I'm not calling the detective, Mama. What I signed is true, and the truth isn't a serving dish. It doesn't go back in the cabinet when company comes. She went very still. The house closes out exactly the way the letter says. And Mama, on Easter, you told me you wished you'd never had a daughter. She flinched, and I made myself finish it gently. I spent 19 years auditioning for that part. Tonight I'm done. You didn't fail the audition, Mama. There should never have been one. For one moment she looked old and small, and I very nearly reached across that table. And the softness went out of her face like a tide going out, and the woman from Easter Sunday came back up to the surface, and she stood so fast her chair barked against the floor. If you walk out that door, she said, shaking now, her voice climbing to the pitch the whole street knows, you are dead to this family. Do you hear me? Dead to us. I stood. I set my chair back square to the table. Corner's true. Go ahead, I said. And this time it came out a whisper, and it is the freest sound I have ever made. I walked out past the taped boxes and the smell of my own childhood, down the porch steps I had paid to have rebuilt, and I got into the SUV, the car that started all of it. I drove to the end of that street and stopped at the stop sign, and I waited. I need to tell you what I was waiting for, because it's the truest thing in this whole story. For 19 years, every single time I left that house, my phone buzzed inside the hour. Every time, a forgotten bill, a fresh emergency, a postscript shaped like a hook. My mother always reached out after I left when she needed something. I sat at that stop sign under a streetlight with the engine ticking, and the phone stayed dark. 1 minute, 5, 10. And that dark little screen finally told me the truth I had driven past for 2 decades. The reaching had only ever been billing. I had nothing left she wanted, so there was nothing left to say. That's when I cried. Once, properly, forehead on the steering wheel at a dead empty intersection in South Louisville. And I want to be precise about who I was crying for. Not the woman in that kitchen. I was crying for the mother I invented, the one I'd been buying gifts for, driving 5 hours for, wiring money to my entire adult life. That woman never lived at that address. Grief for somebody imaginary is still grief. Nobody warns you about that. Then I blew my nose and I called Renata. It's done, I said. What do you need? She said instantly. No questions. And for the first time in my adult life, I answered that question honestly and small. A couch, I said, and a Sunday dinner that doesn't cost anything. Come south, she said. Pot roast is overrated anyway. The next 60 days went the way paperwork always goes. Slowly, and then all at once. Russell took a plea in July, exactly like Ruiz said he would. Identity theft, first felony, full restitution ordered, probation, $200 a month until $14,600 is a memory. The Dewey resolved alongside it. License restricted, fines on a schedule, no time served. And I was glad of that, which surprised the people who'd spent a whole spring calling me vengeful. I never wanted my brother in a cell. I wanted my name back, and a judge had just ordered him to return it in monthly installments. The first payment came in August with a sticky note on it. No greeting, no signature, 1 line in Russell's backhand scrawl. Didn't think you'd really do it. I deposited the check and I kept the note. It's in my desk drawer to this day. Exhibit A of my entire childhood, the whole family operating system in one unsigned sentence. They never thought I'd really do it. That was the load-bearing wall under everything. Marianne always folds. Move-out day was the last weekend in June, and here's what I did. Nothing. I was 5 hours south, on shift, on purpose. Some victories you don't attend. Standing on that lawn watching my mother carry boxes would have fed something in me I've decided not to feed. Shelby sent 1 photograph that evening. The living room, empty, late sun lying across bare floor in a shape I recognized from 2013. And 1 text. It's done. Grandma's at Aunt Dolores's. Daddy got a room out by the distribution center, and they hired him on. An actual job, Aunt Mayor. Also, I found the photo album you made in the donate pile. It lives in my apartment now. Nobody homeless. Nobody rescued. For the first time in the history of this family, every single person was simply carrying what was theirs. A week later, a sign went up on the lawn I had paid to mow for 13 years. The house sold in 5 weeks to a young couple. Both of them teachers, with a little boy who ran that empty hallway at the showing like it was a runway. Something about that felt like the house exhaling. At closing in early August, I sat at a long table and signed my name for the last time on anything connected to Louisville, Kentucky, and I noticed my hand was steady and my chest was quiet. Every other signature I ever put near that family had purchased silence. Sign here so the water heater argument stops. Sign here so your mother doesn't cry at Christmas. Sign here and buy yourself 3 more months of being tolerated. This one bought something else. The wire came through, the note cleared, and what was left over was more money than my family had ever discussed in one room without a lawyer present. And here's what I did with part of it, and I hope somewhere my daddy is laughing about it. I bought the little place on Norris Lake, 2 bedrooms, a stone chimney, a crooked porch, a dock that still needs work, small enough to clean in an hour, mine down to the studs. The agent asked whether my family would be visiting much, and I said, the good ones, and let her wonder. I remember standing at the hardware store counter while a kid in an orange apron cut my new key, bright brass, sharp teeth, and I stood there thinking 13 years buying shelter for people who never once made up a bed for me, and this cheap, shiny key is the first one anybody ever cut for me at my own request from my own door. I put it on the ring next to my car key. The whole ring, mine. You spend your life carrying supplies to other people's positions, and then one ordinary Tuesday afternoon you finally resupply your own. A few weeks later, on a cool, bright Sunday, Renata and her husband drove up for supper, and afterward they shooed me out of my own kitchen and washed my dishes while I sat by the fire like visiting royalty. I want to confess how hard that was, sitting there being done for instead of doing. I have worked codes with less sweat than it took me to stay in that chair. But I stayed, because that's the drill now, learning to be helped, hardest school I ever attended, no diploma, daily formations. The world I left behind kept right on turning without my funding it. My mother is at Aunt Dolores's. She's healthy. She's not on the street. She's still the star witness in her own account of events. And the church ladies still get the director's cut. In July, a card came. Violets on the front. Her upright Sunday school cursive inside. First contact since the pot roast. Under the printed verse, she'd written that she hoped I was keeping well, and then in the postscript, arriving as reliably as August heat, she'd heard the house sold for a good price, and Russell was having a hard season, and surely I could see my way clear. I read it twice at my kitchen counter, and I waited to get angry. And this is the part worth the whole tuition. Nothing came. It was just my mother, being exactly who she has always been, one link in a chain I am no longer holding. I put the card in the recycling, gently. The way you'd fold a flag. Shelby calls every week now. Pharmacology, clinicals, a roommate situation, a boy named Trevor we're all pretending isn't serious. She asked me once, near the end of a call, "Why do you always pick up, Aunt Mare?" And I got to give the old family motto its job back. The job it should have had all along. That's what family's for. Mother's Day came and went this year, and I didn't drive anywhere. I got up with the sun, made coffee, and planted yellow roses along my porch rail. The same climbing kind my mother grew on the fence when I was small. The same flowers that lay in paper on her counter while she told me she wished she'd never had me. It turns out you can take a thing that got left on somebody's table and plant it in your own dirt. Shelby drove down last weekend with a pot roast she made in an apartment slow cooker. Manage your expectations, Aunt Mare. It was too salty, and the carrots were nearly raw, and it is the best one I have ever had in my life, because it came with no envelope. We ate on the porch, the lake did its quiet work, my phone lay face up on the railing all afternoon, and it never once buzzed. And that doesn't mean what it used to mean. The people who reach for me now do it on days when nothing is due. Somewhere in Kentucky there's a woman telling her side of this, and after everything, I've decided she can keep it. I kept the rest. My name, my key, my Sundays, and a 22-year-old who thinks answering the phone is what family is for. Because in her family, from here on out, it will be, here's the one thing I know now that I didn't know last Easter. Love you have to keep paying for isn't love, it's rent. And the bravest thing a giving heart can do is stop paying, close the road, and see who still walks toward you. That's my story. One Easter Sunday, one text message that said, "Go ahead," 2 sheriff's cruisers, and a brass key I finally had cut from my own door. If you have been somebody's supply line so long they've forgotten your first name, take this as your sign. Closing the road isn't cruelty, it's honesty. And I promise you, the ones who love you will still be standing there when the dust settles.